What's up, fam? Welcome back to the channel. If you don't know me, my name is Megan. I am a fitness coach, content creator, and a bodybuilder. I won summer shredding in 2022, and ever since then, I have been on a bodybuilding journey. I plan to compete again at the end of this year. But the focus of today's video is going to be all about understanding glute imbalances from my perspective as both a fitness coach and a bodybuilder, and someone who has dealt with a glute imbalance for many years. About 5 to 6 years ago is when I first really noticed it. The inspiration behind this YouTube video came from a glute imbalance mobility routine that I posted on Instagram a couple weeks ago, and it's really blown up. It's gotten a lot of questions and people really just want to know more. So I am here to give you more. We're gonna go pretty in depth into a lot of the movements that I'm currently doing right now in my bodybuilding off season to grow my glutes, and a lot of the cues, a lot of the little things I think about while I'm training, and progressive overload, really understanding how to approach progressive overload when you're still dealing with an imbalance. So let's just get started on this. First and foremost, like I said, the mobility routine is on my Instagram and my TikTok, and I definitely recommend checking that out because that is going to give you some preliminary context to how to get warmed up and ready to enter a session when you have a glute imbalance that you're trying to address. But one of the main questions I got from people was, how do you even tell that you have a glute imbalance? And in my opinion, it's going to be pretty obvious. It's going to be pretty clear to you if you have an imbalance that is actually causing a problem, because you're probably going to have a little bit of a strength discrepancy. So you'll know if one leg is stronger than the other in certain movements, one side is stronger than the other in certain movements. You might also actually experience a little bit of pain. So for me, for example, my left side is the weaker side, and the left lower side of my back is always where I had pain and soreness the next day because my erector, the muscle on that side of my body, was always trying to compensate. It was always trying to take over and do the work that my left glute just wasn't doing when it came to hip extension. So you're gonna know if one side is weaker, and it might be pretty clear to you that one side is overworking in a non-ideal way. Like I said, a compensation pattern. Maybe it's your back, maybe it's hip flexors, maybe it's your hamstring, right? Like these things are going to pop up and be pretty apparent to you. If you don't feel like there's any glaring, obvious strength discrepancy or pain that comes up in training, for one, you might not be training hard enough or heavy enough to a point where your body is going to have to compensate, right? Like if you've never trained to failure on any movement or really pushed yourself in the gym, it might just be you're not at a point yet where that imbalance is actually obvious to you, right? So part of it might just be pushing yourself a little bit harder in the gym. And the other thing might be that you just don't have one, that you're actually, pretty well balanced, and that's great. That's awesome for you. Don't go looking for a problem that you don't have. Last thing to note is that imbalances between the left and right side are incredibly common, and they're not a problem if they're not causing you any kind of pain, right? Like it's very common to have a shoulder imbalance, a glute imbalance, in part because internally we aren't actually even either. One lung is bigger than the other. This can cause a little bit of torso rotation or a little bit of a change in how one side of the rib cage sits versus the other. Same thing with the pelvic bone. Like there's a lot of things inside the body that are not even close to symmetrical that are going to cause the way that we move to not be symmetrical, a little bit imbalanced. And that's okay, that's normal. So unless it's something that's really causing you pain or that's like glaringly obvious, don't go searching for a problem. You might be fine. So first thing that we need to think about when it comes to addressing the weaker side is what the problem actually is. For a lot of people, there's going to be limited range of motion, either in terms of internal rotation or external rotation. I don't necessarily need you to have a deep understanding of biomechanics to really grasp what's going on here with the body. You've got the femur and the femoral head that sits inside the hip socket, right? It's either limited in its ability to internally rotate, which will get a stretch on the glute, or externally rotate, which helps the glute fully shorten. We're talking mostly specifically about the glute max in this case. So if it can't fully internally rotate and or externally rotate, we're missing a little bit of that range of motion, a little bit of that ROM, and we are limited in the amount of stretch, in the amount of stimulus we're going to get in our movements, in hip extension, hip flexion, right? What we want to do for the glute in certain cases is increase the degree of internal or external rotation that you're lacking on your weaker side. Again, if this is the problem. It's not the problem for everybody, and if you want a clear diagnosis, you're going to need to see a physical therapist. But through all of my research and through all of my years that I've spent working with several physical therapists, And learning from other people's cases, this is what kept popping up. And a lot of the movements that you see online to help you grow your glutes, or warm-ups that pop up saying, hey, this is a warm-up that's gonna help you grow your glutes or help your hips feel better, are movements or stretches or mobility work that is helping you increase your internal or external rotation and strength of all of the muscles that help you do those things. Strength and stability. So with the warm-up, that's really what we're just trying to do there. We're just trying to help your hip be stronger and more stable and access the range of motion it needs to fully lengthen and fully shorten the glute max. Like I said though, that warm-up is on my Instagram. I'll link it in the description so you can check it out. Okay, let's get into the meat and potatoes of this, the movements. And I filmed both of my leg days that I've been doing for the past like 24 plus weeks to break down a lot of the movements that I'm doing and what I'm thinking about, the cueing that I'm really thinking about while I'm doing them. Number one is everybody's favorite, Bulgarians. And I actually do these twice a week right now. And I do think that Bulgarians are one of the best glute builders out there, one of the best movements for glute stimulus when you learn how to do them. I also think they're one of the best movements that you can be doing to help improve your glute imbalance because they are a unilateral movement. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're trying to gain strength and build muscle on the weaker side, you're gonna wanna do some unilateral movements. And I would even recommend having some unilateral movements in there that you only do on one side. So maybe you go through an entire leg day and you only do Bulgarians on your weak side for 3 sets of 10 to 12. You can do that. Your stronger side is definitely not going to miss those Bulgarians. You're training that other leg in several other bilateral movements in that same movement pattern. It's not just going to atrophy and fall off. So Bulgarian split squat. A couple things that I really like to think about in a Bulgarian split squat to really roast that glute is, number one, I'm usually trying to keep my torso somewhat upright. I know that a lot of people say that really hinging over is going to get more stretch on the glute, and taking a really wide stance is going to help you do that as well. If you have tried both of those things to no avail, then guess what? You're going to have to try to sit upright and sink down into the movement. Now, what we're really looking at here in glutes versus quads with a Bulgarian split squat is the amount of knee flexion. If that knee is driving super far forward every single time because you have a very short stance, then yeah, you're probably going to feel it in your quads a little bit. So play around with your stance width for one, but you might also find that having a good combination of both hip flexion and knee flexion actually helps you recruit your glutes a little bit better. I find sometimes that people take a really wide stance and then they start to really feel it in their hamstrings, and it's like, well, yeah, you're not really putting anything in a super advantageous position when, one, you're making your base a little bit less stable because it's so wide and so long, and two, we're really just getting these awkward amounts of hip and knee flexion with such a wide stance that your body's just going to try to figure out the best way it possibly can to get you up and down. So give your body the advantage of having a stable stance, which means it might be a little shorter than you expect, it might be a little bit longer than you expect, but you have to find that. You need to play around with that. And I highly recommend, in playing around with that, trying to keep your torso upright instead of trying to hinge back super far. It's not a hinge movement. It is a squat pattern movement. Something that I have found that can really help with the internal-external rotation part of this is actually adding a little bit of a rotation toward the working leg. This is going to give us a little bit of that internal rotation of the femur, and also not necessarily always trying to just push your knee out all the time. I think that's a cue that gets way overdone as well, and sometimes causes you not to allow the foot to naturally pronate. If we're always trying to push the knee away from the midline, then sometimes we're not allowing that pronation to happen. I'll see people's toes kind of floating, they're balancing on the side of their foot. Not gonna do it for you. So plant that foot, push through the midfoot, push through the toes, and allow your knee to stay either straight, or if you're rotating, guess what? Your knee might come in towards the midline a little bit. That's okay. It's totally okay, especially if you're feeling your glute work a little bit more when it does that. Now let's take a different angle and look at hamstring curls, because I think it is very much forgotten that hamstrings play a major role in glute development, and when we have a glute imbalance, it's pretty common that one of our hamstrings are weaker as well, in part because of that hip extension pattern. We can also find that there's the discrepancy of a weak glute and a strong hamstring, but again, like, it's so person to person, so if you really want to have the answers to this, go see a physical therapist. At the end of the day, you should be doing hamstring curls, you should be doing isolated hamstring work, whether it's seated or lying, and you should be doing some unilateral work here as well. I really like to warm up with unilaterals in a lying or seated hamstring curl, and I like to go for like a really good squeeze there at the top as well, just to again like focus on that neural drive. And I also really like rest pause when it comes to a hamstring curl. So in that lengthened position, we're getting a little bit of a pause. And in that shortened position, we're getting a little bit of a pause. We're getting that full range of motion with the hamstrings. If you're doing these unilaterally, you're probably gonna notice that one side is weaker than the other, and just giving yourself the opportunity to recognize that and start training that weaker side and getting it stronger and getting yourself able to really sense that. Like also really thinking about, is it the lower part of the hamstring? Is it the upper part of the hamstring? Do you feel it more in the inner leg, the outer leg? Those things matter. And being really aware of your body and the stimulus that you get from certain movements is so key. So slow down and pay attention, especially in isolation movements, accessory movements like a hamstring curl. They can tell you so much about your body. Right now, I train my hamstrings about 2 to 3 times per week. Every time I train them, I'm doing about 3 to 4 full sets of that isolated work. So focusing on that has definitely, for me, improved my glute imbalance and helped a lot with being able to recruit my left side in movements like an RDL, where you do need both glute and hamstring to be working together and to be strong. Now the leg press. This one can be pretty tough, and I think a lot of people like to look at the leg press and say, oh, that's a quad movement, right? That's a squat pattern movement. You're really not gonna be getting any kind of glute on that whatsoever. I definitely disagree, but this is going to come down to how your body is set up. If you really can't get into a position in a leg press where you can get your feet high enough on the platform and get comfortably deep enough in that eccentric to get a good stretch on the glute, this may not be a movement that makes a ton of sense for you, and that's okay. But for a lot of people, what we can do here to make this a more glute focused movement is put our feet pretty high up on the platform, so we're getting a lot of hip flexion at the bottom of the movement, which means we're getting a lot of stretch on the glutes. Yes, we're still gonna have a little bit of knee flexion, but the higher you can get your feet up on the platform, the less knee flexion we're going to get, the less quad we're going to get. And all that being said, if we can use this movement to really get a lot more internal rotation at the bottom of the movement by doing it single leg and by twisting our torso towards the working leg a little bit, we can get a ton of glute. Build a lot of glute strength and definitely experience some hypertrophy here. That's what I notice at least. But the other thing that I really like about the leg press in the context of working towards a glute imbalance is that I do leg press twice a week. I do it both unilaterally and bilaterally. And I like the fact that this allows me to really tap into whether or not I feel like that weaker side is getting stronger and starting to participate a little bit more when I'm doing it bilaterally. So I will do 3 to 4 sets of a single leg press in one of my leg days. I will twist my torso a little bit towards that working leg. I really try to bring my knee towards my chest, and that stretch on the glute, that increased internal rotation, goes nuts, right? But then I'm also doing the bilateral one where I'm not actually twisting at all. I'm not creating any rotation. I'm really just going for depth. And at the same time, what I'm really focusing on, even in that bilateral movement, is driving with my weaker leg, is pausing at the bottom and really thinking about whether or not my weaker leg is doing the work alongside the stronger leg. I don't let my stronger leg lead. I also tend to watch my knee of the weaker leg when I'm doing it bilaterally. I really watch that knee so that it's not wobbling all over the place. When the knees are wobbling back and forth, and I don't mean just like caving in once or pushing out once, I mean actually wobbling in any kind of movement like that, it is showing that there's a little bit of instability. A little bit of instability usually means there's a little bit of weakness, and if we can get stronger and more stable, we can apply more force, and therefore we can grow a little bit more. So I really try in my bilateral leg press to watch my knee, and just the act of watching my knee actually helps me stabilize it a little bit more. It does a lot less wobbling, and I can feel that glute working so much more as compared to if I'm closing my eyes or not specifically watching that weaker side. Next up, we got abduction, and guess what? If you have a super weak glute and a super strong glute, it's not just the glute max. A lot of times the glute med is connected to that as well. And so I noticed that my weak side, where my glute max is both smaller and weaker, my glute med is also a little bit weaker. So abduction, or pushing the knees away from the body, can be a lot harder on that side as well, and it's taken me a while to get stronger there. Now, I was lacking a little bit of internal rotation and external rotation, and external rotation and abduction go hand in hand. If you can't fully abduct, if you can't fully access that external rotation on the weaker side, you also can't fully shorten. And in abduction, we're trying to fully externally rotate, full range of motion in terms of external rotation, fully abduct. If you're lacking that access, then you're not going to get a full shortening. And like I said, you are not going to get a full lengthening if you're lacking the internal rotation. So when it comes to the seated abduction machine, I really like to pick my hips up a little bit. I'll experiment with being seated and leaning back, or pick my hips up a little bit. From what I understand, and from my own experience, and from talking to my own coach and talking to a lot of other people, you can get really good upper glute development, both being seated leaning back and being seated leaning forward. You're just gonna bias the glute max a little bit more when you are seated leaning forward on the abduction machine. So I am training my glute max in a million other ways, I really wanna bias the glute med. So I tend to lean back, and sometimes I even pick my hips up off the seat to give myself the ability to not actually let that strong leg have so much leverage. Sometimes I feel like picking my hips up off the seat actually allows me to create a more even playing field, but it is less stable. So I am gonna be working with a little bit less load, but I'm gonna alternate between the two. And whichever one I really find is allowing me to connect to that weaker side, that weaker glute med, is the one I'm gonna stick to for that day. Recently, I've been actually really liking just doing it seated and not picking my hips up. But at first, I did really like picking my hips up. So allow yourself to change, allow yourself to evolve. That is a big part of this, is something that you might have really loved for a really long time might not be working for you anymore, and it's okay to ditch it and move on to the next thing. And it's also okay to just change your opinion over time, or learn new things over time. I know that for a long time, there was a section of the hypertrophy community that really hated abductions and felt like you could do literally anything else to be building your glute med. And now they've kind of come full circle, and they're okay with the abduction machine, and they're giving, cues and advice on how to use the abduction machine. So nothing is just like off the table forever unless it is just based in really stupid science. But for the most part, like, we can find a purpose for a majority of movements. And I do think that actually warming up with the abduction machine can help a lot if you feel like you have very weak glute meds. If you have a very hard time working against any kind of banded work when you put the band on your knees, or if you sit on the abduction machine and you feel like you can barely move things, especially with that weaker side, that should be something that you're starting with. Start your workouts with the thing that you are the weakest with. And that goes for all of your unilateral movements as well. Is always start with your weaker leg, because it's going to set the bar where it actually needs to be. And so that, you're not doing a million reps with the stronger leg and then you can't keep up with the weaker leg and then you bail out, right? That's only gonna keep getting that stronger leg stronger. So start with the weaker side, start with your weakest movement, and oftentimes abduction is that girl. Now, one of the big guys, the hip thrust, which I think is fantastic for glute development. I think anybody that tells you the hip thrust is not a great glute developer is, again, just trying to be unique and fancy. It's one of the most perfect movements for developing the glutes, because all you're doing is hip flexion and extension. There's very little knee involved when you can position yourself correctly here. So hip thrusts are great for glute development, and hip thrusts are also great for progressing a glute imbalance, both unilaterally and bilaterally. I actually don't do any unilateral hip thrusts. I only do bilateral hip thrusts. But the great thing about this is that I am very hyper aware in doing these at the end of my leg day. Almost every time I do them at the end of my leg day, I'm very hyper aware of how my weaker side is performing that day, what weight I need to use in my hip thrusts to get that weaker side to really catch up, and not even just catch up, but like lead the way. The same way I was talking about with the leg press, I think about those same things when it comes to the hip thrust. Now, the other thing that I really like to think of when it comes to the hip thrust is not only everything I've talked about when it comes to the feet, but thinking about how you are moving your spine and your pelvis. I think for a very long time, coaches very much popularized that scoop method, but it also really caused people to go into a little bit of spinal extension at the bottom of their hip thrust. And when we are going into spinal extension, we are shortening those back muscles, your spinal erectors. And so they're getting really, really sore backs after doing hip thrusts, and we're just not recruiting the glutes as much as we could, or we are recruiting the glutes as much as we could at maybe the top of the movement, but having that coupled with a really pumped up back or really sore back doesn't really have you feeling great at the end of your leg day, and sometimes it can be a little bit injurious. So I have really started leaning into the original fold method of a hip thrust and keeping a very neutral spine, not trying to, set yourself up with a big arch and then scooping under. You really don't need to do that. Another thing that I also think is really important in a hip thrust is, again, the knee positioning, foot positioning. Yes, driving through the midfoot. Yes, making sure that your toes have contact with the platform or the ground, but also same thing here where we're not always trying to push the knees out. If you feel like you're always pushing your knees out, you are probably going to run into the problem that I had where your adductors, your inner leg, your groin area starts to become weak. And I actually pulled my groin because of this, because I was always pushing my knees out and I wasn't actually strengthening my inner thighs. So as much as you're going to strengthen your abductors, you want to strengthen your adductors as well. And you want to give them the opportunity to help stabilize at the hip and stabilize overall in a movement like this. So if, again, your knees aren't pushing out, they're actually staying here, or you find that a more narrow stance in a hip thrust, which I find to be a lot more comfortable, if you have a more narrow stance in a hip thrust and you get better leverage, better glute stimulus there, that's also something that you can do that might help you, especially in like a single leg hip thrust, to really develop the strength and stability that you need to get that weaker leg to catch up. So as you do with the leg press, watch that knee. So now that I've touched on a lot of the movements that I'm currently doing in my leg day and kind of how I'm thinking about them when it comes to improving my glute imbalance, I want to touch a little bit on progressive overload with a glute imbalance and understanding how we're still going to build strength overall and grow our glutes, especially if you're like me, you're a bikini competitor or a bodybuilder, where growth has to happen at the same time as we are correcting movement patterns. Like, we really don't have a lot of time to let off the gas per se. So let's talk about that, right? I do think that it is incredibly beneficial to have one exercise in your program that you are only doing unilaterally. And I know I mentioned this earlier, but like I said, your stronger side doesn't need to be focused on as much as your weaker side because it's already the stronger side, because you already have the pattern down. And chances are you are not going to be training that weaker side so well for such a long time and neglecting the stronger side that the stronger side is going to fall behind. That doesn't really happen often if you still have a lot of bilateral movements in your program. So let's say you have a training day. You're doing hip thrust, you're doing leg press, you're doing Bulgarian split squats, you're doing hamstring curls. You can do all 4 of those movements evenly and then add an extra set or 2 of Bulgarian split squats on the weaker side. 2 extra sets on the weaker side. You can also do all of those movements evenly, and then maybe you're doing reverse lunges on the Smith machine only on your weaker side for a little bit of extra volume in that squat position. Or maybe you're doing only RDLs, single leg RDLs on that weaker side. If you feel like a hinge movement is actually giving you better glute stimulus, you're doing maybe 3 sets of single leg RDLs only on that weaker side while everything else is even. That is okay to do. That's okay to do. Like I said, you could do that for like 6 to 8 weeks and then start doing them on both sides and look to see if there's a strength discrepancy, because most of the time you actually have better neural connections with that stronger side. It's going to catch up really, really, really quick. And like I said, the brain is incredible. Your body is incredible. There are studies that show that people who have like broken arms and they're training their other arm, not only does their broken arm actually experience less atrophy, which is incredible, but when they start training it again, they have a much quicker recovery time than people who didn't train the stronger arm. So there's communication happening between both sides here. And it's really, really, really important to allow yourself to put the emphasis on the weaker side without trying to hold yourself back from the fear of the stronger side being left behind. It's not going to happen. Also, when it comes to progressive overload and we're looking at these bilateral movements, right? Like a squat, a leg press, a deadlift, I do think that in certain cases it is going to be beneficial to pull back on weight on those for a little while you are putting more emphasis on the unilateral movements. That might mean that in my leg press, I am pulling back on weight a little bit while really pushing hard in my Bulgarian split squats to try to get that strength discrepancy to improve, try to get that imbalance to improve over time. And then at the same time, as I'm bringing weight down a little bit on the leg press, I'm still working back up in that weight. I'm basically coaching that weak leg up with the strong leg over time to get back to a point where it's like, okay, like 200 pounds is my PR. I'm gonna reset back to 150 and I'm gonna spend a week or two at 150, really focusing on that mind-muscle connection and the stimulus of my weaker leg. Feeling pretty confident at 150. Okay, now I'm gonna go to 160. I'm gonna do the same thing, spend a little time here. 165, 170. You're still trying to work back up to those PR weights and beyond, and you don't have to necessarily reset everything from the ground up, but pulling back a little bit to ensure that you're still making progress each and every week on that weaker leg in a bilateral movement can be incredibly helpful, incredibly beneficial. I start everything with my weak leg. I always start everything with my weak leg. I have more energy at the start, so I can put more energy and more concentration into making sure I'm getting the stimulus I need, I'm getting in the pattern I need to. And then when I hit failure or the spot in which I need to be for a certain movement with that weak leg, I basically set the tone. I set the bar for that strong leg. And that might mean that in my Bulgarian split squats, my strong leg has an extra 3 to 4 reps in it versus my weak leg has 0, but that's fine. The goal is not annihilate one side of my body and annihilate the other. The goal is get the weak side stronger and allow the strong side to grow alongside with it. Lastly, let's talk timeline, because I do think that a lot of people will go into this thinking like, okay, like if I'm doing a Bulgarian split squat on only one side for 6 to 8 weeks, in 6 to 8 weeks, this will be resolved and my glutes will look even. Probably not, probably not. I was dealing with this glute imbalance and I was in pain from it for about 2 to 3 years. And it took about another year and a half of really actively understanding my body, doing the work, developing mobility routines with physical therapists and with bodywork professionals and mobility professionals to get to a point where I was seeing some pretty significant progress. And then now I would say 2.5 to 3 years since the start of getting super serious about it, I can train pretty much pain-free. Every once in a while, I still kind of notice the imbalance and I'm like, it's still there. I also have a labral tear, so I'll probably always have about that 90-95% function on the left side versus the right being at 100. But that being said, even though I am always going to notice that that imbalance is there, I don't have the pain from it anymore. And I can push really hard in my training. I can compete in bodybuilding and not have a significant imbalance on stage. And so the improvements have definitely happened noticeably over the past 2 to 3 years. But it has taken that long. It genuinely has taken that long. And I did take a little bit of a break from bodybuilding in itself. And so I think if we really zoomed out and looked at the fact that I was running for a little while and doing CrossFit, again, pain-free, which is a big part of this, but because I was running for a little while and doing CrossFit and not necessarily focusing on the hypertrophy of that left glute, we could maybe shorten that timeline to about 1.5 years, maybe 2 years if I was doing it very consistently, but that's how long this is gonna take because it takes a long time to build significant muscle mass. I do develop training programs, both for one-on-one coaching and for self-led programs. So if you're on a budget and you really want a tailored program for you to help you start working towards improving a glute imbalance, I can absolutely help you with that. I have options for people who are on a budget, and then I also have more intensive options if you want nutrition help on top of that. If you want the whole shebang, I do offer those both. I don't take on a lot of clients every single month, so if this is something that you are interested in doing, I am gonna put my application link both for the self-led program and for one-on-one coaching in the description. And I really say with that, like I said, I don't take on a lot of clients every single month, so when you apply, just come to me in a pretty serious spot. Like if you really want to get started, let's chat. I will be so transparent about everything that is required to get started with me, the cost, everything like that in terms of what you're looking for, what program you're looking for. I think the 18-week program, I have the cost on it, so you can just click through that link. Otherwise, like I said, there's no pressure to get started with me. I only accept a few clients every single month, so I don't really need to push people to get started. Like when the spots are open, and when they're closed, they're closed. So that's that on that. If you're in a spot right now though where you have a lot of pain from it and you are really struggling with movement, your first stop is always going to be a physical therapist. And I'm also going to leave a couple handles, Instagram handles, for physical therapists that I've worked with and physical therapists that I just really trust in this online space here down in the description as well, so that you have all of the resources that you need, whether it's me or another creator, another physical therapist, a bodywork person, all the people that I really trust. I want you to be able to use them as a free resource or to be able to invest in yourself in the right way to help resolve this problem. If you found this video helpful, please give it a like, share it with somebody, and subscribe to my channel, because I am so excited to keep continuing building out this educational content for y'all and just like stepping into the zone as not only influencer Meg, but truly here as bodybuilder Meg and professor Meg and whatever. I'm not a professor. I digress. I'm just here to share experiences, to share my knowledge, and to help y'all out. So like, subscribe, share the video with a friend, and I will see you next time. Thanks for joining in.